Okay, so let's move on to working on the next section of the page, and that's the search bar. And it may seem very simple in the diagram here in the mockup, but you'll see that there are actually some tricky parts to it. So the first thing we're going to do is, of course, set up the HTML to handle that. And we already have our search container down here, so we don't need that. But what that's going to be is a form. And usually you'd have some additional fields associated with the form, but because we're not actually going to need to submit the form, we'll just ignore that for now. And the form is going to have two inputs. And so the first input is going to be the text input, which makes a lot of sense. And we're going to give it a class of its own, and we're just going to call it the search bar so that we can target it later. And we'll add some placeholder text, and this is kind of a nice, fun little thing that you can do. And as you see in the mockup, we'll say enter your search terms here, and that just basically gives you that grayed out text that disappears when the user clicks. All right, so we have that input, and then actually why don't I just show you how that looks over in the file here. So we have just a very generic little search thing here, and oh, look what happened. So we have a little bit of alignment issues going on with our nav bar, and I think we've been mixing inline block and floats, and sometimes that can get a little bit messy too. So I'm actually going to go back up here to where is it? The nav elements container, and oh yes, the logo container. So right now we have the display as inline block. I think what I'll do here is actually change that to a float left. That should clear that up. All right, so we're good there. And so now we have one input for the search term, but we of course need the button to submit it as well. And so that's another input, and that type is actually going to be submit. And we'll give that a class of its own as well. And we'll call that let's see, why don't we call that the search submit. And we'll give it a value, which is basically the word that's going to be displayed on it. And we'll call that search. All right, so now we have two inputs, and now they basically just need to be styled. So we'll go down here in our style sheet, we'll go down to the bottom here, and we'll start working on some of our styles. And so the first thing we'll do is just buffer our search container. And so we want to make sure that it's very cramped right now just sitting up there at the top. So we're going to just provide a little bit of margin for it. So we're going to say the margin is going to be 30 pixels on the top and the bottom, and then auto on the left and the right. And as you'll see, as you should remember, doing margin auto on the left and right usually centers an element. So if we do that, oh wait, there's no centering going on. What's happening? So actually that only works if the browser knows definitively how wide the element's going to be. So if you look at our little div box here, the little gray box, our element's 100% of the width of the browser. So for the browser's perspective, it's already doing a margin auto. It is centered. It just happens to be 100% of the width of its containing element or container element. So what we actually want to do here is specify the width. And we can do that by just jumping into our mockup here, and we see its size 622 pixels. So we'll just call that around 620. And now it should be able to center that. So now we have a nice little search bar area that we can start to work with. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start styling those inputs. And so it's a good thing that we gave them classes that we could hold on to. So again, we'll kind of work within the search container class. And one thing that's a little bit weird about inputs, and I'm not a huge fan of it because it's always a bit of a problem, is they do their padding a little bit differently every time. So just to be clear on things, let's just set the padding of both of these inputs to 2 pixels, and that's going to send it 2 pixels around all sides. And so that'll give us something that'll make it a little bit easier to work with them in just a sec here. So let's go back to our search container, and in this case we'll do the search. Why don't we do the search bar first? So we'll take that, and we want to make it bigger. I mean, obviously you can see in the mock-up that the font size is a little bit bigger. So we'll make a font size we'll do 24 pixels. We'll set a line height that's nice and tall, so we have some room to work with, and we can grab that from the mockup as well. It's about 34 pixels. All right, let's do that. Let's just give that a shot. Again, this first pass, it doesn't need to be pixel perfect in terms of looking beautiful in a browser. It just needs to kind of get everything in about the right place, and we can always go back later and start pushing pixels around. So we have a line height of 34 pixels, and then we're going to put a width we're also going to want to define that because again, it takes up a specified amount of space. And so if we look on the mockup here, it's meant to be 460 pixels. But we do want to take note of the fact that our width is going to be influenced, the width on the page is going to be influenced by the padding as well. So if we're assuming that we have 2 pixels of padding on each side to get to 460, simple math, 456 pixels. And so that should get us to where we want to go. And again, we have a border around it as well, and the border is also going to influence that in a slightly different way, but we'll think about that in just a second. So just to get on the same page with the border as well, I like to sort of override the default browser settings for these things because the default browser forms just look so 90s. And we'll leave it like that for now. And so great, we now have a big old search field where we can enter our search terms. That's pretty cool. And so now let's work on the search button. So for our search container button, search submit, we're going to do another line height just to be consistent on the way things are working here, 34 pixels. Line height's a pretty useful property. It's kind of a hack, but it's a good one, at least as far as practicality is concerned. 24 pixels on the font. We'll add another border just like everything else again, just like to try and keep things consistent. And we'll do a vertical align as well. Well, here, why don't we hold off on that for just a sec? I don't think we actually need that since we have everything fully specified. And then the last thing that we need, of course, is to figure out what the width of that is supposed to be. And so if we look up here, we have it's about 140 pixels minus again the 2 pixels of padding on each side. And so we're going to get to 136 pixels of width. And again, specifying the width is just going to make your life much easier. And so now the last thing we need to do is just put that little buffer, that little channel between the two items, between the two elements, and we can do that by just putting, it's kind of hacky again, but we can do just a margin left on this one. And we'll call that, because we have 4 pixels of border total, we have 1 on the left of each, 1 on the right of each. We'll just call that 16 pixels, and hopefully that's not gonna push anything out of it. There we go, look, that looks beautiful, wonderful. So what we have now is a functional search field. One thing I do want to change though, is it looks like our padding is not quite enough. And you could choose to take a look at this and address it or not, but I would actually like to have a little bit more padding on the left before that text comes in. So I'm just gonna be a little bit crazy here and jump into my search bar and I'll edit the padding left, and instead of 2 pixels, why don't we make that 12 pixels? And then that's going to change some of the other styles. You'll see things get bumped around a little bit. And so that means that we need to reduce the width by 10 pixels. And that should solve everything out. So now the text starts kind of out here in the middle instead of pushing right up against the edge. Small things, but they add up in the end and they matter. Whoops. So now that we have that finished, why don't we do a responsible git commit? So we'll do a git status just to see what's up. Oops, git status. All right, so we've the 2 files that we've changed. We'll do a git add all, git commit, and we'll say style search bar. Oops, sorry, that was a shortcut that I usually use. Okay, and so there we go. We've got our git commit. We're ready to move forward to the next part.